At the time the Bible was written, it was believed that the earth, especially in the Old Testament, was flat and sat upon pillars of a kind. That was common knowledge at the time, people believed.
That is correct. The people who wrote the Bible believed that the world was spread out like a map over a disk, not a sphere, but a flat circle divided into 4 quadrants, mistranslated as corners. This disk world stood on pillars like a table so that it would not move, because the people who wrote the Bible didn't know that the earth revolved around the sun. They had it the other way around, which is why they thought that God could stop the sun in the sky. The Bible also says that this disk world on pillars was covered by a giant transparent crystal dome, and that the sun, moon, and stars were all contained within the expanse of this massive dome. They thought of the earth as a reverse snow globe, a bubble of air submerged in an eternal oceanic abyss. The biblical authors didn't know about the virtual vacuum of space. They thought that outer space was full of water, so they imagined fountains would allow the water in from below the firmament, and that windows in the expanse of it would allow rain in also. The mere fallible people who wrote the Bible didn't know how tiny the earth is in relation to everything else. They thought the earth was the first thing in existence, and that it was the biggest thing at the center of the universe, which is how the Bible and then the Quran both describe it. Because Islam, too, was inspired by the same imagery, as the Quran's descriptions of the world consistently match this tabletop map, even including how the Quran says that mountains are used as paperweights to hold the map down, and that the sun and the moon are of equal size, both smaller than the earth, but bigger than all the stars, all contained within the expanse of this firmament, just like it says in the Bible. Now, the Bible doesn't say all of that as clearly or concisely as I just did, because back then, just as Bob Dutko himself just admitted, that was taken to be common knowledge. The construct is more complicated than I just described, but there was no need to explain what everyone already believed as if they didn't already believe that. And these details are there for all to see, but they're unconnected, strewn all throughout the Bible in different places, and they're easier to recognize when you see them in context with the cultures that produced the Bible. My friend Lorence Yufa, who is a rising scholar of biblical history, did an exhaustive, in-depth, and I think brilliant exploration of the many elements of flat earth cosmology that are found in the Bible. It's a feature-length documentary. He chose that format because of the many necessary illustrations. I'll put a link to that video below, and I'll play a clip from it in a moment. But the summary is that everything the Bible says about the earth in relation to the rest of the cosmos is laughably wrong, and has been known to be wrong for thousands of years.
But Job 26:7 says he suspends the earth upon nothing.
A verse that is often pointed at to support the idea that the Bible is not a flat earth book is Job 26:7, because in this verse we are told that the earth hangs upon nothing. To be clear, it does in fact say that, but I think there is a serious case of cherry picking here. Let's take a look at the full verse. He stretches out Zaphon over the void and hangs the earth upon nothing. Well, that does it. It says right there the earth is hanging on nothing. This is clearly a reference to the fact that the earth is floating in space, unattached to anything. What? What do you mean it's not? The story is actually really complex here. On the face of it, the verse doesn't make much sense. What does it mean to stretch out a mountain over the void? Or what does it mean to stretch the north over the void? The possibility has been suggested that Zaphon and heaven would have become synonymous at one point. Since the top of this mountain was considered to be in heaven, housed the divine assembly, and was the abode of God himself, the conflation may have arisen. Roberts argues that Zaphon should actually be understood as the earth here in Job 26:7. He argues for this based on the parallelism of the verses in the passage. In Job 26:6-9, the first and second part of the verses seem to be saying the same thing in 2 different ways. Sheol is Abaddon, naked means uncovered, etc. Based on this, Roberts suggests that Zaphon and earth are synonymous, making the understanding of the verse, God stretches out the earth over the void and hangs it upon nothing. While that makes a little bit more sense, I think there are layers that are unaccounted for. But before jumping to any conclusions, let's consider the other part of the verse. Where it says that God hangs the earth upon nothing, this is probably the correct reading. There have been others suggested to get around the cosmology question, but they don't seem to pan out well. Robert Alter translates this as, he stretches out Zaphon over the void, hangs earth over emptiness. As in, the earth is suspended over nothingness. But in his commentary on Job, David Kleins explicitly says that it is not suspend over. So it seems there's quite a strong disagreement between these two. While I can't speak to the Hebrew text, it's clear that the Greek translators of the work agreed with Kleins. The translators of the Septuagint, the earliest Greek translation of the Bible, went with ektenon borean epuden kremazon gein epi udenos, which I translate as stretching the north toward nothing, hanging up earth upon nothing. Using epi plus an accusative and epi plus a genitive in the same verse signals to me they use slightly different meanings of the same preposition. According to the lexicon of Liddell and Scott, kremazo means hang up and is often used when hanging up a shield. So to me it seems like the Septuagint translators understood it in the sense of the earth actually not hanging from something. There are a few ways to read this. The most popular one among modern-day Christians is the interpretation that this is talking about the earth floating in space. The thing is, we have no reason to believe that ancient Israel was more technologically advanced than their neighbors, so maybe we need to look at the verse a bit closer. The word used for stretching out here is natah. It can also mean set up in the context of a tent. In fact, it's very often the word used when setting up a tent. So if God sets up Zaphon over the void, perhaps it means he created the holy mountain. If so, why is the holy mountain here called Zaphon? Are we to accept Robinson's claim that Zaphon was a generic term for holy mountain? If we understand it as north, what are we meant to think about when we visualize the north being stretched over or even set up over the void? Does it mean that this was the traditional location of Marduk's acts? Did he stretch out the body of Tiamat from this location, and Job 26:7 simply contains a remnant? Or maybe the original version of this was used for Baal or Hadad, and it was later adapted by the author of Job to fit the context of the story. And because I'm a crazy person, I came up with more ideas. What if it's meant to be about what God can see? Like in verse 6, Sheol is naked and has no covering. God can see right into it. In the same way, Zaphon is over a void, so he can look at it from below and see into it. Whether it means the actual cosmic mountain or north. And the earth hanging upon nothing would help God's vision too, because there's nothing obscuring the earth from above. Then it goes on to talk about the actual physical covering of a cloud. Job is a hard text to translate at all, so there are a lot of questions concerning its interpretation. I'll stop babbling momentarily to bring it back and cha-cha real smooth. Remember when we talked about 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18, the song that swapped out heaven and mountain? I feel like this might be related to Job 26:7. In those chapters, we see the darkness that God is covered in when God is going to help David. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. It's in the area between the earth and God's throne. If Zaphon is the cosmic mountain, which is God's abode, if there was a convention of substituting mountains and heavens, and if this cosmic mountain is stretched over the void, is it unreasonable to think that at some point in time the cosmic mountains in general were viewed as alternate terms for heaven? This would explain why Zaphon is stretched over the void, and why we have the replacement in the song of two subjects that seem so clearly different to us. Maybe Robinson is right when he says it is more likely that holy mountains were customarily called Zaphon, and that Zion and the holy place of Ugarit were just two examples of this tendency. I'm not sure how much weight this actually holds, but I'm starting to come around to the interpretation. In fact, it would align with a motif in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I mentioned how Gilgamesh was traveling to the end of the world, and how he had to cross many unique areas. One of those areas was a region of darkness. Maybe it was a common belief that somewhere between the heavens and the earth was a region of darkness that both Gilgamesh and Yahweh encounter when crossing that boundary. It sounds like Job 26:7 has more to it than meets the eye. It ties in beliefs about the heavens, mountains, and their meeting in one neat bow. That leaves us with one big question though. What does hanging the earth upon nothing mean? Ancient commentators understood this in some unique ways. Because they had no concept of gravity and believed the earth was the center of the universe, this verse had to make sense in their cosmological model. Olympiodorus the Deacon says that the support of the earth is nothing but an understructure, but it is suspended and sustained by divine will. In his first homily on the Hexameron, a fancy Latin word for the first 6 days of creation, Basil the Great essentially agrees with this when he talks about the nature of the earth. When I first read his thoughts on Isaiah 40:22, it kind of seemed like he was dodging the implications entirely. In the Ancient Christian Commentary series, basically a compilation of Christian commentaries that are presented in a verse-by-verse style, Basil is quoted as essentially ignoring the meaning of the stretching of the heavens. He moves immediately to, well, let's talk about the earth instead. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. So I went ahead and read the whole homily. The argument is essentially that we shouldn't try so hard to understand the earth or the heavens in full because it would break our feeble little minds. But when actually addressing the shape or nature of the earth, he goes off on a series of hypotheticals. If the earth was on air, it would fall right through it. If the earth was on water, it would sink. If the earth was on something solid, it would have to be heavier than the earth because the earth is on top of it. If that's the case, then those solid things would need to be held up in some way, lest they fall through the void. Remember, at this time, people thought the universe was geocentric, so everything was moving around the earth. Basil goes around the question by literally saying that God's got the whole world in his hands. However, I think the answer to this is probably a lot simpler. It might be a callback to the idea of the bonds or ropes that Marduk sets up. In any case, they would be denying its reality, which is fine because it had been a long time since the Enuma Elish was written. On the other hand, my mind jumps to one thing. The earth isn't hanging on anything because it's set up on pillars. You don't have to hang from something when there's something beneath you holding you up. I just spent what looks like 4 pages rambling about the things that hold up the sky, but we haven't even talked about the nature of the sky. When we think of a firmament, we think of a dome with all these stars on it. If this interpretation is correct, then the stretching of Tsaphon over the void implies that the firmament is stretched out in Canaanite thought as well.
Lorence Yufa covers myriad other elements of flat earth beliefs from the ancient Near East which reflect their influence in the Bible. Ironically, it seems that the one thing he missed regarding Job 26:7 came just a dozen chapters later in Job 38:14, which has God himself saying that the earth takes on the shape of clay under a seal, meaning that the earth is in the shape of a disk that would be otherwise flat except for some topography provided by the mountains. What's important about that verse is not that God got it wrong, that if God had actually said that, then he certainly would have known better, and this verse would therefore be deliberately, deceptively misleading. A lie. No, that's not what happened here. God obviously could not have actually said that. The book of Job has God saying a lot of things that are both wrong and stupid. If God existed, he would be neither stupid nor a liar. So even if God really exists, he obviously could not be the one to write this verse, just like he didn't write the Quran or the Book of Mormon or the Bhagavad Gita or any other sacred scriptures either. Those were all written by men who all have God saying things that are stupid or hateful or wrong. No. The only reasonable conclusion is that whoever wrote that didn't know it was wrong. They didn't know anything more than the nonsense that everyone around them believed at that time. This verse especially, but really the whole book, was not a history written by God. It can only be the work of people who made up a story in which God is just a character. Thus, whatever God says there is whatever the authors decided their God should or would have said in that situation. Because the book of Job, and in fact the Bible as a whole, just like all the other supposedly holy scriptures too, cannot be the word of the one true God. Even if there is one true God, those can only be the words of mere fallible but imaginative men pretending to speak for their God.